Seekers of the unknown, unite. Paranormal M is your compass in the vast landscape of the supernatural. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to navigate through our captivating tales, where the line between fact and fiction blurs. Alien sighting and reoccurring dreams. As of right now, the dreams have died down, but this is something that most people don't believe when I tell them this. A few months ago, I constantly had extremely agonizing migraines followed with brain fog. This always happened at night from what I can recall, and there was always an ominous mechanical humming and buzzing over the roof of my house. After the first few nights of this occurring, it had occurred again, but this time I believe I had actually seen what the source of this sound was. What makes this more disturbing is that I live quite far from any other airports that maybe a 12-kilometer radius of the area that I live in. And I saw this colossal triangular aircraft with 3 red but dim lights in its corners. There were green strobing lights on its sides and white lights around the center of the structure. It moved quickly, but sort of low enough for me to notice it. Sadly, I was too slow to capture a photo of it because it just got out of view. After this incident, I kept having extremely detailed dreams about these strange aircrafts. One of which, in particular, was one of the most detailed ones. I was in my house with my mother and suddenly I felt the urge to go outside and look at the sky. I had my camera with me, and when I had walked outside, I saw this huge triangular craft. I took a few photos of it. When I went back inside, time had seemingly accelerated from dawn to sunset. I woke up from that dream with a short but excruciatingly painful migraine. The second dream took place in what looked like a UFO assembly line, with some sort of gas giant outside the window, in space or something or other. I was sitting in some sort of waiting room and a man dressed in what looked like some sort of spacesuit took me on a tour. I saw all sorts of UFO types, cross-shaped, dome, cigar, triangular, cube. A few days after this dream, I had seen the strangest shit I'd ever seen in my life. I'm sorry if my grammar is bad while writing this, because I'm currently on my mobile. I was standing outside with my friends drinking some Sprite, and an hour after they left, I saw this rectangular, dark metallic object with red lights on its corners hovering by the side of my roof. There was a glass panel on the side of it with something, I can't really recall what, inside, controlling it. I dropped my phone in horror before I could take a picture, but it didn't even hit the ground. It felt like time just stopped. I caught something moving in the corner of my eye. I glanced over to my left and saw this gray cylindrical thing with contorted legs and a horn with a glowing end on what would be its face. The way it moved will haunt me for a long time. It was jittery but disturbingly smooth, as if it was rotoscoped into reality. After that, time leaped forwards, and it was as if I'd been standing in that same position for an entire night. I walked in my house and immediately fell asleep. Tried to get my mind off of what happened that night, but I couldn't. I wasn't doing under any drugs or intoxicants during this. A fond memory of college. This happened to me in philosophy class, and we were actually on a related subject of casuality and persistence. I came in like usual with notes from the last lecture. Only about 15 minutes in, I noted something strange. It was the exact same lecture, word for word. It was a really small class with only majors in it. I think maybe 12 of us, max. So I stopped the class and said, "We've done this before." The professor replied, "Yeah, you sit, I talk, you write, we do it 3 times a week." And I go, "No, like we covered this yesterday." And he goes, "Well, this is similar to what we talked about yesterday, but it goes further." And I say, somewhat frustrated now, "No, we've done this before, this exact lecture. I have the notes in front of me. You're about to introduce X and his Y theory." Too long ago, I don't really remember the actual content, so for now, X and Y. The professor's mocking tone and smile instantly faded as I brought the notes up to his podium, and he said, "Okay then, lead the class." So I did. I even put the diagrams that he was going to show on the board. At the end, I asked him, "Is that about it?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll go into more detail, but that's exactly right." I thought everyone was playing a joke on me. As I went through the lecture, everyone was laughing. Granted, I'm somewhat of a comedian when I lecture or dictate, but they were also diligently copying down notes. I was in disbelief. I kept looking over to my best friend, who was literally on the floor cracking up because he couldn't believe what was happening. He and I were thick as thieves into paranormal stuff like this, whilst everyone else in the department started out as a non-believer. And to the professor, who would nod back, "Yes, you're doing well, keep going." At the end of the class, the professor came up to me and asked if I had somehow gotten the notes from his computer, or if the class was following the same direction as the time that he taught it. Like I got the notes from a previous student, which he actively tried to avoid by changing his material every term. I said, "No, man, I literally sat down yesterday at this lecture and took notes, came back today, and it's like everybody forgot yesterday happened at all." He looked at me with a deep concern for a moment and laughed and said, "Well, shit looks like I have some more research to do." He was firmly against paranormal stuff like time travel, but this one event was enough to break his whole worldview. And that's the story of how I turned a philosophy class full of skeptics and a skeptical professor into believers. Well, maybe not all believers, but none of them were adamant against the paranormal after that. I would bring other crazy stuff up to my roommate, who was also there at the time, and he would reply, "You know, 3 weeks ago, I would have told you that was bullshit. But I kind of believed it was bullshit too, but now I don't fucking know anymore, so I'm just gonna say fucking bullshit. Please don't make me think about it." Paranormal or not, this is some scary shit. I grew up in a house built back in 1959 or 1960. My parents picked it up in 1995, where they lived for a full year before adopting me in 96. There's no public information on who owned the home before my parents moved in, but the 35 to 36 period of time before they bought it lends itself to having at least 1 or 2 previous owners. My parents never talked about who they bought it from. So anyway, as a kid, I was pretty adventurous. I would go exploring in the attic and even found a secondary attic not connected to the main one, accessible only through a hatch in the spare bedroom. Never really went up there because there wasn't anything interesting. Or so I think. Maybe I'll revisit it next time I'm around. The one place I didn't venture, however, was the crawl space. We have a finished basement with the door leading to the crawl space, which is about 4-ish feet tall, and I'm 5'11", and I have to crouch like Master Chief to walk around. Now, I already didn't like the basement very much, and I absolutely hated being down there alone at night. Straight up bolted upstairs when I had to turn the lights off, and I'd just crash for the night. Both the dog and I had, I guess, the same time. My new one aren't or wasn't a huge fan of it either. I rarely catch them alone down there. But one day, I was feeling ballsy, I guess, and I just decided to go exploring when I got home from grade school before my parents got home from work. I opened up the door into the crawl space, and my dog Travis waited anxiously for me at the entrance. Neither him nor my current dog Rico ever went in there, and even went near that door. Well, I made my way towards the back of the then gravel-laid flooring, past all the storage bins my parents had placed in there, and rounded a corner by a moderately sized sinkhole. The gravel was lower there for some reason. What I found was a chair and a mattress pad with a blanket folded up at its foot, like one might find at a PADS facility. I noped the fuck out of there and shut the door. When my mom got home, I told her about it, so she went in, not believing me, and upon exiting, looked as bewildered as I. When Dad got home, he did the same. I asked them if they knew anything about it, and they just said they'd never seen anything like that before, that they didn't know how they even got there, and that they had admittedly not been back to that part of the crawl space in years. They removed the items and never spoke of it again. There was also a Bible, Protestant I believe, which was obviously not my parents' as they're Catholic, sitting on the chair. And now that I think about it, not uncommon for homeless people to find comfort in religion, but hey, maybe the squatter heard some spooky shit. Now, that's all verifiable fact. What follows are my personal experiences that my parents, and will probably continue, to vehemently deny. Growing up, I had often noticed some weird things, objects in my room moving from the place that I'd left them. I figured my parents just lied when they said they hadn't gone into my room and moved anything, which is fair enough. Stranger, I heard shuffling coming from the kitchen, which I chalked up to my dog, until he had passed and I continued to hear it from time to time. I would hear cabinet doors opening with a distinctive magnetic click and a creaking of the hinges swinging open slowly. I heard plates rattle or slide. I figured maybe one of the parents were up and moving around getting a snack and such. Only I'm a night owl, and I would just stay up far later than my parents, reading in my room at the end of the upstairs hallway. Their room was right by the wooden stairs. Now for the, in my opinion, freakiest part. That hallway creaks under the weight of a human walking on it, and I, of course, had learned to navigate it without the creaks. But the sound of my mother or father walking down it was undeniable. The stairs were even more challenging, as I'd have to get out on all fours and equally distribute my weight for them not to creak. While during the silent hours of the night, when I was up far past when I should have gone to bed, and when my parents had already been asleep for hours, I would hear that rustling, those hinges open, those plates slide, but never the fridge open, strangely enough. And even more scary, though, were the footsteps in the hallway. I would hear the distinct sound of someone walking with shoes or boots on wooden floorboards, but the boards wouldn't creak. Granted, my room is at the end of a hallway next to the bathroom. I would often explain it away as my mom or dad coming down to use the bathroom late at night, which sometimes it was as the light would turn on. I'd hear them use the bathroom and flush, and the light would go off, and I'd hear them return to their room. Only sometimes the light wouldn't go on. The footsteps would stop at my door, and sometimes I'd even hear the slightest rattle of the knob being touched, but never twisted nor opened. I'd become hyper-aware, my heart racing and my hair standing on end. In those cases, I'd never hear footsteps return to my parents' end of the hallway. My dogs have also acted strangely from time to time, frequently sitting bolt upright and staring at nothing. Recently I had an experience, possibly a sleep paralysis-induced nightmare, but I had felt as though I had real physical sensations leading up to it, of Rico and I cuddling until he stood bolt up in my bed, staring at the doorway. I grabbed his collar and blinked, only to open my eyes and see a white figure hovering with no legs in the frame. He got anxious and began to try to escape my grasp. And as I blinked again, the figure began to float toward me. I decided I wasn't going to take him down with me, so I just let him go, and he sprinted out of the room. I blink again, and I see nothing but a misty white, unidentifiable face. At which point I clamped my eyes shut. I feel my face turn to ice as I black out, waking up hours later in the late morning after the sun had already risen. The only other memorable occurrences I have was in the basement, and this time with me fully awake. I had brought my electric bass and its tripod into the basement with me to play while I was bored. It was mid-afternoon with nobody else downstairs, not even my dog. I was sitting on a chair on the other side of the room watching TV when, out of nowhere, the tripod, bass and all, simply fell over, like someone had strongly tapped the head of the bass on the side. Being accustomed to all sorts of weird shit happening, I simply walked over, stood it back up, and said aloud, "You can fuck with me all you want, but do not touch my instruments, you got it?" Never before, nor since, have I had any problems with my instruments. Now this title says Haunted Apartment, but I'm going to go out on a leaf and suggest that they meant Haunted Apartment. My family used to live in an apartment complex as a child, and we moved out when I was about 7 because that's when my parents bought their first house. I must have been 5 or 6 at the time, and I can backdate it to those years before that. I used to sleep in my parents' bed with them, and then one day my parents decided to buy a bed separate from theirs, and they placed it next to their bed. The apartment was on the lower floor, and it had 4 floors. It had a kitchen and a living room. We had 8 people living there, my mom, dad, grandma, and 4 brothers. 2 brothers would sleep in 2 of the rooms each. My brothers are a lot older than me. The youngest one was next to me, was about 7. My oldest brother is 10 years older. Every brother is 1 year apart. I know, right? My grandma had her own room, and my parents had their own room. My parents' room was a south right door, was south right of the door, which was in the north left. Of this room, my parents' bed faced the door, which faces a hallway. Down the hallway, toward the front of the apartment, on the left and right were the rooms that my brothers stayed. When my parents brought the separate bed, my bed faced a bathroom. Behind my bed and my parents' bed, there's a thin rectangle slit window toward the top of the wall. The details are important, and I'll explain later. One night I couldn't sleep. My parents are sleeping already. The room was dark, but the window of the room, the ambient light from the moon, shined through. I see a figure with a bluish glow. It was a woman in a long white dress and long black hair. The face wasn't visible. She didn't look at me. She was floating in the front of my bed and hung a left to the bathroom that faced my bed. I remember covering my head with a blanket and I breathed, and it was hot. And then I fell asleep, and I always told myself until adulthood that it was going to be a nightmare, and it was pushed out of my memory. After we moved out of that apartment to our house, I never really thought about it for years until I was an adult, maybe in my 20s. My brothers, the second and the fourth, one day somehow talked about the apartment. My family kind of split up because the 2 brothers were out of state. My second oldest brother, who slept down the hall, he used to get bad grades and had to focus on issues, and coming from an Asian immigrant family, that was a no-no. My dad used to make him stay up all night late to study and improve his grades. He said that late at night he heard footsteps on the walls of the hallway, as if someone was walking on it. Next morning, he would have scratches on his back. My brothers were saying how some lady committed suicide in that apartment. I've only confirmed it for months with my mom, and we chatted about purchasing a home. Then I asked out of curiosity. She said, yeah, a lady committed suicide in that apartment before we moved in. And that's when I told her the story. Side note. This apartment complex faces a middle school. My brothers used to go there and said that one of the school bathrooms is haunted because a girl committed suicide there or something. The students would avoid that bathroom. Also, my first brother could see spirits and ghosts. He was talking to my other over there, and he just tells them to leave him the fuck alone now. We never really sit down to talk about ghosts, like it's not even a thing, only if it comes up. My person story. When I was 13, me and my family moved to a big farm as a last resort to prevent homelessness. Yeah, this sounds as cliche, but I wish it was. The landowner had a bigger farm with a production, a bit further down the road, and his caretaker lived next to us. He was an old, happy man with a lot of sparkle and joy in his life, but lived a bit messy and humble. When I was 15, I went away to a school for sports talents for a year on the soccer line, and I was supposed to be there for 2 years, but in the summer holiday I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife. She moved in with me about 3 months after, and with her parents' consent. That's important. A while later, the caretaker unfortunately died. I never found out how, but that's not important either. Not long after, we began to hear footsteps out in our yard that was filled with small rocks instead of dirt or concrete, and every night different times and various lengths. Then it became footsteps and whistles, both from the yard, but also from inside the house. The real haunting began where this entity became physical and turned on lights and other electronics. One evening I was home alone in the room playing games, and from my room I could see the hallway and the bathroom to the right of my room. I sat there and the light turned on in the bathroom, so I calmly asked if it was my girlfriend, that they may have come back from a quick toilet, but no answer. I paused the game and went out to see, but no one was in there. I felt a quick freeze and I was unable to move for a couple of seconds. I heard a deep, angry voice say, "Hello," and a sensation of someone's hand on the back of my neck, like someone found me trespassing the property. I ran as fast as I could down the stairs and out to the garage that faced toward my room's window. I stood there looking up at my window, multiple times, saw quick movements of a shadow, and one time a full-body apparition looking down on me. And then the shadow stopped. I spent 2 hours in the garage in the middle of nothing but just freezing and waiting for my girlfriend and parents to come home. Move a couple of months forward, my girlfriend is pregnant. We moved rooms to get bigger, and a bigger one for us and her daughter. One night we were sleeping and I felt uncomfortable the entire evening, but pushed it aside as tiredness or a mild flu. Well, we laid in our bed, and when both of us were sleeping, I woke up on top of my girlfriend with her neck in my hands and her screaming. I remembered nothing. My name is Patrick, but I woke up as Peter. I had distinct memories of a man's life that wasn't mine, a hateful man. I remember nothing, only that he was awful. Still to this date, 12 years later, some memories just pop up and I see this man in the shadows and feel his appearance near me. I have 3 stories to give to you guys. About 6 years ago, me and my family was living on a farm in Denmark. We only had one neighbor, an old man who took care of our garden. He had this really old song that he liked to whistle when he was working around his house or the garden. Well, one day, he was dead by old age in his living room. Time went on, and after 3 or 4 weeks, we began to notice the sound of gravel getting stepped on in our driveway. But nothing was there. We had these automatic light sensors. And slowly, his freaking whistling came out from the fucking darkness, and it went on like 3 times a week in the night. So my second is also a part of my first experience, but this one freaked me out. So the ghosts of our neighbor became more direct and kind of violent. Me and my girlfriend were sleeping in my room, and I felt this very negative presence in our room suddenly. I became heavy and I blacked out for 5 minutes. I came back to my girlfriend screaming and begging for me to stop. Apparently I was trying to choke her. Can't remember shit on this, but it wasn't me and my name's Patrick. But I knew that it was Peter, which was also our neighbor's name. And on another night when my girlfriend was out with my parents to do a little late night shopping, I sat in my room playing games and I had a beer when the bathroom lights turned on without thinking. I just assumed that maybe someone stayed to use the bathroom, but then I realized the drive was an hour and a half ago. So I went out and looked. My bathroom was on the 2nd floor, at the stairs, while I was standing there, and I looked around and felt the same negative presence again. And a voice just saying, "Hello," followed by a push toward the stairs. I didn't fall, but jumped these 18 stairs and ran as fast as I could out into the garage and sat there waiting for them to come home. We moved 4 months after that. So my last one is kind of more UFO related. So I hope it's okay. This was like 3 years ago. Me and my girlfriend had moved and was living in an apartment with a balcony. I was out having a smoke when I noticed a green and red light in the sky, just assuming it was an airplane. But I noticed and stood still at the wider part. And suddenly, they just shot away from each other and then went back together again in what seems like 50 to 100 meters apart while circulating each other. And it was there for like 15 minutes. None of my camera equipment could even capture it. I think one of those stories was a repeat or a retelling of the other story. But I, the narrator, reads on. Screaming Ghost. I grew up in southeast North Carolina, just outside of Fort Bragg. The summer after 6th grade, we were visiting my aunt who lived in a small single-family home in a neighborhood called Erin Lakes West. That day, another house in the neighborhood caught fire, and the fire department was called to put out the blaze. Like all curious kids, my brother, sister, and cousins, all under the age of 15, decided that we would go check out the fire and see the firemen in action. My brother, sister, and oldest cousin got a head start, and I was asked to take my younger cousin with me. As we walked along the main road in the neighborhood, which ran alongside of the lake, I heard a girl scream. The area between the road and the lake was about an acre of wooded land, which was unkept and full of weeds, trees, and underbrush. Upon hearing the scream, I immediately began moving in the direction of the noise. I began calling for the girl, but received no response. So I ran into the road and stopped the first car that came along, which belonged to a female soldier in military uniform. She exited her vehicle and immediately began searching with me. After a short while, the fire was extinguished and the firefighters were dispatched to her location to assist with the search. In the end, no one was found. No one came forward to say, "Hey, that was me, sorry if I scared anybody." And also, no one reported missing. I believe this was a ghost. The reason I believe it was a ghost was that when the girl screamed, it sounded like she was just a few feet away from me. I would move in that direction, and when I got there, no girl. No more screams. These weren't playful screams either. These were screams of someone being attacked. It still gives me goosebumps 30 years later. voice outside my room. I think it's super odd. Something similar happened yesterday. So when I was in high school a few years ago, I was asleep in bed on a weekend. I woke up at like 2 a.m. because I heard yelling outside. My dad works the graveyard shift for context, but he usually gets home around 5 or 6 a.m. I thought it was so weird, but I hurried downstairs. It sounded just like him. He was yelling my name, telling me to let him in and help him. I woke my mom up as well, and she obviously was less than thrilled to be up. Although she heard it because she then said, "What the? Why is he yelling like that?" As we both headed to the side door to let him in. But he wasn't there. His car wasn't there either. No one was. As soon as I opened the door, the yelling stopped too. My mom and I just stared at each other for a good few minutes, unsure of what we heard. It was so weird I even asked her again if she really heard it, and she confirmed it. The thing that made me bring up this whole thing was that it happened yesterday. Or rather, something else happened yesterday. I'm in college now on summer vacation, and this time I was drawing in my bedroom. And I should mention that right now my mother is visiting family on the other side of the country, so I'm home alone at this time. It was around 10:40 when I heard the same thing, except it was my mom's voice. Except she was just yelling my name outside. It lasted like a minute, but I didn't answer the door like last time. It was really strange, and I figured I'd just share it here since it was so recent. Some weird stuff is happening in my home. Any help would be greatly appreciated. So about 2 years ago, Memorial Day of 2021, I was out on an Airbnb with some friends in Iowa. On that trip, I was sitting in a hot tub at night, and I saw as vividly as the person sitting right next to me, an old bald man in a button-up, standing underneath the deck, and he was just looking at us. I asked the 6 people I was with if they could see him, as I was shocked, and they each said no. I freaked out and sprinted inside. They all thought I was crazy. So did I. Until I saw him briefly near the woods by the house a couple of hours later. I haven't seen him since, but some weird shit has been happening. Shortly after that trip, I had a jar of olives that somehow lost all of their juice overnight. I enjoy the occasional martini, which is why I noticed. There was also a morning where my bathroom sink was running when I woke up. The sink that was running was the faucet that I never turn on in a double vanity in the apartment. Shortly after my wife and I moved apartments, nothing to do with that, just so happened to move. Nothing out of the ordinary happened for about 8 months. Then one night a glass on her nightstand started spinning like someone had knocked into it or spun it. I tried to recreate it with pillows, knocking into it, bumping it, etc., but couldn't recreate it. Moved again. Again, just moving into our new home about a month ago. Within the first week of moving, had a spoon knocked off the counter. Tonight, had the weirdest experience apart from the ghosts that I saw this far. Was on our back deck, and our basement light turned on by itself. This light is only able to turn on by one switch, and it's not on a timer. After confirming that there was no way me and my wife could have turned it on, I started to clear our house to make sure that, no one was in it. When I got into our garage, I was looking at my wife's trunk, closed the door, turned on my car to look in the window, and my car alarm went off. I was still about 5 feet away from it, and there were no loud noises, and my keys were upstairs. My alarm has never gone off ever, let alone without anything causing it. At this point, I'm freaked out beyond belief. If anyone has any idea on what this could be or how to deal with it, I'd be extremely appreciative. It feels like whatever this is following me, as I've had very few experiences like this to the point in my life outside of the occasional bump in the attic when I was younger. Moving is definitely not an option, as I'm in my dream home and I just purchased it. My family and friends keep seeing me around the house, but it's not me. Is it a ghost? A poltergeist? This has been going on for like 15 or 16 years. My family, with the exception of my father, all believe our house to be heavily haunted. It's an old southern farmhouse with quite the history, like so many others. Plenty of deaths, plenty of suspicious activities. It's seen the Civil War. Family house passed down generation to generation. You know the drill by now. This particular activity is nothing new, but it never fails to disturb or perplex. Ever since I was like 6 or so years old, people have seen me around the house in odd places or at odd times, even though I'm actually somewhere else entirely or not home at all. On top of that, the me that they see never looks at them or acknowledges them. I think the first time was my older sister insisting that she saw me standing in the hallway in the middle of the night when she got up to use the restroom, despite the fact that I was tucked into my parents' bed after nightmares. She said I wouldn't answer her, and when she came back out of the bathroom, I was gone. Friends who spent the night would see me walking through the kitchen only to sit up and see that I was still fast asleep beside them on the couch. My father, who doesn't believe in the paranormal at all, insists that he once was even speaking to me while I was sitting on the couch, and I wouldn't even look at him. Apparently, I just stood up and walked away without acknowledging him. I wasn't even home when this happened. Questions and stories about my house's ghost. My house is haunted by what we believe is an 8 to 10-year-old boy who wears old-fashioned clothing and a cap that my nan says because he likes to look at himself in her mirror. And when he's close enough to an old cigar-like smell appears, and he doesn't like anything to do with the monarchy or politics. When we were watching the Queen's funeral, we think that he's glitching the TV and he doesn't like that my Paddington Bear figure I had was standing on my wardrobe, and he always used to turn it around or make it flat on its back, until one day he threw it, so we came up to the compromise of having Paddington face down. He always used to turn around, my granddad's Winston Churchill statue. He used to take my clothes, and I had a pair of jungle animal pants that went missing for a year and then just showed up neatly folded on my shelf. We don't know much about that little boy, but he's been here for a long time, I'd say 25 plus years, because he's been here since my nan bought the house. And if I had to guess, maybe World War I or World War II time? My area was heavily bombed and my neighboring streets were flattened. Is there any way I can find out more about him? How can I make sure he's happy in this house? Do you think his parents or family will also be here? I think he's all alone because he's so young. I'm looking for info on what's been happening to me. I have something that's messing with me and my fiance, and I'm looking for really any info anybody can give. There's two main parts of what's been going on that might be connected, but I can see it being two separate entities. I live in Arizona, and back in October or November of last year, my dad was nearing the end of his life. My lady and I were driving home, and we seen a skinwalker walk right across the road in front of us. Had to be around 6'5" and looked like a coyote deer person, and so skinny, almost like part of it was missing. Because the only way I can describe it is that it was on 2 feet, then dropped to all 4. It was such an intimidating feeling, and we both felt it. And what we seen for a minute before asking each other if we had seen it. About a week later, I was home early from work and I was folding clothes with the bedroom door open. And I and our 4 dogs distinctly heard my fiance's voice call out, "Babe, I'm home," and the door close. Me and the dogs all ran to the living room, but she wasn't there. Her car wasn't in the garage, but I know I wasn't crazy because all 4 dogs are looking at me confused and looking for their mom. I call her and she's coincidentally passing the spot that we seen it. Fast forward to December, my dad's body was shutting down from cancer, and the week before he passed, we seen the skinwalker the second time, same spot. Same walk, same appearance. My dad passed away on Christmas, and I feel like I should include that we think his spirit came and visited for the next few days after. Just a peaceful feeling. I have his recliner, and it was like someone was sitting on it. The coffee pot jumped on the counter, footsteps, whiffs of his aftershave out of thin air, and our dogs were just watching and reacting to something that we couldn't see. I don't want to leave anything out as I have, sort of multiple working theories on what it was and why whatever it has chosen to mess with us. After that, nothing happened. No activity. January through May. May rolls around and stuff starts happening again. I'm at work and I get a call from my fiance, very concerned and asking me if I'm home because she was in the house and heard my voice call our dog's name, Scout, in a sing-songy kind of voice that I used to greet him with. All the dogs were looking for me, and we both described an uncomfortable feeling with all our hair standing up in goosebumps during each of our encounters. Since then, we've seen a shadow person watching us, probably 10 times, scaring the dogs. Heard voices that we can't make out exactly. What are they saying? And tonight, I'm laying in bed with the TV on, looking at my phone. I see behind my phone screen in front of a TV a dark mist appeared. My dog seen it and jumped up barking at it. 20 minutes later, every smoke detector goes off in my house for about 20 or 30 seconds. Then all shut off at the same time. Checked every battery and everything's good. I want to add that we bought a 5th-wheel camper, that we lived in it for 2 years, and in May, when all this started happening, we started remodeling it to sell it. We had bought a house in November and needed the money for a trip for the first week of June. I can't say anything happened to me in the camper. We had some strange noises. In the corner of my eye, stuff sure, but never thought anything of it. My lady, on the other hand, never said me about it until just a month ago, but she said that she's seen things a few times in that camper. So like I said, I just need ideas on what and why. We just found out that we're having a baby and I don't want to have this happening. I don't know if the possible skinwalker is connected to the shadow figures and mists, and the voices, or honestly, I don't know about any of it. I will say I feel drained now, like I did when we lived in that camper. I don't know. I was saved from an accident. 19th of May, 2021. It was a very sad day for me. One of my cousins, who's also my best friend, unexpectedly passed away just a week prior to what would have been his 26th birthday. I decided to drive to his family to offer condolences and be with them during this difficult time. It was a long drive from one end of the country to the other. Along the journey, I was driving across a long, empty stretch of road. It was the early hours in the next morning now, and the car was in cruise control, and I was feeling pretty sleepy. I wanted to get out of there in order to find a side road and rest, but my sat-nav was telling me that I'd have to keep driving for about another 20 minutes. I tried to stay awake as best as I could, but it had been a very intense day, and something that had never happened to me happened. I started to fall asleep behind the wheel. I fell into a vivid dreamlike state where I was still semi-conscious, but barely. I had some strange dream and vision that I had a car accident along the same road and I was looking at my destroyed vehicle from a third-person view. My car was also on fire and I was trapped inside of it. I felt a strange sadness and goosebumps when I looked at the scene from the third-person perspective. Suddenly, I heard a panicked, loud voice of a stranger. "Wake up!" It sounded like a young man, and I had a sense of urgency to it, too. I got shook and woke up immediately. I got extremely shocked, as if someone was in the back of the car. I turned back immediately, and my car swerved a little, and then I turned to face forward. I noticed that I was speeding towards a temporary red traffic light with 2 or 3 cars parked behind it, 100 yards out. The visibility of the road had been poor, but the road prior to this was empty. I didn't notice any cars in front of me before then. I don't know where they came from, as there was no adjacent slip road leading into the temporary lights the cars could have just slipped in from. I managed to get out of the area, parked my car at a service station, checked my car including the trunk to make sure no one was in there, and then I rested for a few hours. I just had my first real experience, and I'm terrified. It's 5 a.m. right now, and this happened at about 4:30 a.m. I'm in bed with my boyfriend, and my dog wakes us up barking and running to the front door. We both groggily call out to her to come back, and as she came back, in the dark of the doorway, I thought I could make out the form of a child confidently strolling up to the door. I yell out a little bit from surprise, and only partially to my boyfriend. "Oh my God, what the fuck?" And the figure I thought I saw was of a dissipated sort of a thing, and it swooshed to the left toward the spare room door, which is directly next to the bedroom door to the left. And I had left it closed. My boyfriend is asking what happened and what's wrong, so I'm telling him what I thought was there, saying that it must have just been my brain making shapes from the bathroom door. As I'm saying this, the same childlike form peeks around the doorway, like it was bending from the hips and peering in at us. I scream again. "No, there's somebody there, I swear, there's something really, really there." And the figure stands back up straight, turns, and quickly walks away back toward the front door. I could see it bobbing like it was really walking. I was fully expecting to hear the front door, but nothing came. Boyfriend went out with my light to go look around, and sure enough, nothing's out there. Front door is locked. We turned on some lights and I asked him to come up with me to get some sage from the living room. We do, and when I get back to my cabinet of sage, crystals, and incense, I ask if he's touched anything over there. He said no. My incense plate holder was upside down. I swear I saw it. I've never seen anything like that before. I'm not a stranger to the paranormal, but this was the first time anything truly happened to me. The weirdest part is how my cat and my dog, after the initial bark and run, weren't bothered in the slightest. Dog had run back and hopped into bed, got cozy, and the cat just laid on his bed and wondered why we were freaking out. Cat's in my doorway, and now he's happy as a clam. If that's anything to go by, then I'd say it's not something harmful or negative. However, it made me so incredibly uncomfortable. I did walk through the apartment with Sage. I told whatever it was that it wasn't welcome here and needed to leave. I have almost all the lights on now. My boyfriend's back to sleep, and I'm staying up until my alarm at 7. Please, I've seen so many videos, I've heard so many stories, but having it literally at my door has me feeling like my body's on ice, and I'm trying to rationalize what I feel, and it can't be rationalized. I'm all about you can see shapes in the dark explanations, but in my experience, those shapes don't move. Ask Reddit. I was quite a firm unbeliever of anything ghost-related until I moved into an old 19th century converted house. It was converted into 4 flats. From the first day, I never liked going into the hallway to the point where I would walk quite quickly to the bathroom if I had to go in the middle of the night, and everyone else who came to the flat felt the same thing when they were in there. We would play poker, and the person with their back to the hallway would always be looking over his shoulder if the door was left open. We'd always have stuff move that we were sure was left in a specific place. Obviously, we just thought that we were being absent-minded, so after a month or so, electronic toys used to start going off in my son's room in the middle of the night when he wasn't staying with me. Things that aren't turned on, but that are activated by moving them or picking them up. Needless to say, I didn't like going to check on them when I did. As soon as I opened the door, they would stop. So I used to set up a camera in there and have it film on the torch. I'd leave it running, and every time I went back to it, sure enough, the light was on. Wish I still had those videos. I only ever caught the light going on and nothing else. No ghostly figures or anything, just the light switch on. I used to do it for dinner guests whenever they came round and never really was disappointed. I even remember using a keyring torch of a friend once. Then after a few more months of this going on, my partner at the time and I were sitting watching TV and we heard a beeping noise. Didn't think too much of it and we carried on watching TV. I needed bathroom break after a few minutes and got up, noticing a glow coming from the kitchen. When I went in there, the microwave was microwaving away with nothing in it. I can only assume the beeping was the microwave timer button being pressed. I wish I could say that it's a faulty microwave, but I've still got it today and it's not done since I left. Or rather, not done it. I also remember waking up in the middle of the night having the covers pulled down on the end of the bed. I remember thinking that it was my partner pulling the covers by moving in her sleep, but she was completely still. I do remember pulling them back up, and there was resistance. Couldn't bring myself to look at the bottom. Ask Reddit. I hate ghost stories, and being a natural skeptic, I read stories like these and immediately think, these are bullshit. But that's just built in my defense mechanism. And that said, I never wanted to believe in the existence of such a thing until I had my own experience. An old girlfriend of mine and I went to visit some friends who had recently purchased a new home in Chicago. It was one of your typical Chicago-style bungalow homes. So the guy's showing me around the house and everything is pretty standard fare until he says, "Let's go check out the wine cellar." "You have a wine cellar? Sweet." So we go into one of the bedrooms, and in the closet, there's this small half-sized door with locks on it to lock it in a manner so nothing that's downstairs can come up into the house. We open the door and it leads down into a full-sized basement. At first, I thought it was just really cool, and then I started to ask why the only way into the basement was through this weird door in the closet. My friend had no clue, but he didn't really think anything of it. I recall feeling kind of strange and uncomfortable down there. And later on that evening, we all went out for dinner and drinks and returned to the house to catch some sleep. They had 2 couches that my girlfriend and I were asleep on. Now, it's not uncommon that when I'm sleeping somewhere for the first time that I have a difficult time falling to sleep. So I'm lying there on the couch just staring at the ceiling and listening to my friends busily moving around in the back of the house. Or so I thought. After lying there for what seemed like a couple of hours, listening to all these back and forth footsteps and the sounds of a door opening and closing, I decided to get up and go see our friends and if they were still awake. When I got to their bedroom door, I realized that everybody was very much asleep. At first I was a bit freaked out, so I went back to my couch, pulled the blanket up to my chin and just laid there with my eyes wide open. More noises. By the time I heard the doorknob of the front door turning, which was only a few feet away from where I was lying, I literally just started laughing. I had no idea what else to do. I wasn't scared, I was just kind of blown away by how surreal it all was. Finally, I drifted off to sleep, The next morning I woke up very groggy and my girlfriend was already sitting up on the couch across from me. As soon as her friend walked into the room, the first thing that she said was, "Dude, your house is totally haunted." I couldn't believe it, but the whole time she was hearing the same thing as I. When we tried to talk to her friends about it at breakfast, they absolutely refused to discuss it. That was the last time that we stayed there. Spooky stories from my family. Story number 1. My cousin passed away from a motorcycle accident and died on impact. He passed away at 4 a.m. That same night, my mother woke up to this figure at the end of her bed. The figure had skeleton hands and was praying. A couple of hours after my family and I woke up, we received a phone call from my cousin's close family to tell us that he had passed away at 4 a.m. My mother went cold once realizing that the figure she saw had to mean something. I couldn't sleep that night because I felt like someone was watching me. Story number 2. This is a story that's not from my post. The house we grew up in was basically haunted, and the person that was affected the most was my female cousin Anne. At night, Anne's bedroom would be lit by the moonlight. This day, as Anne was falling asleep, she was woken up by the shadow underneath the moonlight. Her first instinct was to call for her mother, but she didn't pick up. Anne was determined to leave her room as soon as possible. As she walked away from her room, she decided to put her back against the wall and walk sideways so her back wasn't facing anybody or anything. As she started to walk, Anne felt followed and watched. Once she got to her mother's room, she explained everything. Anne's mother knew that the house had some sort of activity. Before this instance, Anne was in her bedroom. A dream catcher began to sway back and forth, with no window open or fan on. There was no way for the dream catcher to move so aggressively. Anne's mother barged in and started cursing. Although Anne had not told her mother what was happening, she knew for some reason. The dream catcher stopped moving instantly. Story number 4. Apparently, we're skipping story number 3. I never met my mother's parents because I was too young to understand death. My mother never explained why I hadn't met her parents. I would sleep with my parents often because I would get scared of sleeping by myself. I randomly woke up screaming. My mother was next to me and she asked me what was going on. I told her I saw a man next to her bathroom. She asked me to describe the man. When I did, she showed me a picture of her dad and asked if it was him. The man I saw next to my mom's bathroom was her dead dad that I'd never seen before. Story number 5. Spirits. When my dad took anatomy in the 1980s, it's hard to truly really understand or see bone structure since skeletons were hard to get for school. In my country, grave robbing wasn't a crime at the time. My dad and some of his classmates decided to go to the cemetery at night and find freshly dug graves to study bones. While he was looking for good-looking bones, his friend alerted my dad because he saw a guy with a flashlight who they thought was the nighttime guard. Once hiding, the person with the flashlight disappeared and they saw a crowd of people with what seemed like a reunion. This was obviously weird because it was midnight. People disappeared and my dad, a skeptic, didn't know what to do. His friend ran out and climbed the gate. Dark, shadowy Fresno night crawlerish encounter in Denmark. I was walking home from work yesterday after dusk, yet it was still somewhat light outside, as during these times in Denmark, the light persists for quite long, and at 3 separate occasions encountered and heard something strange that I can't fully comprehend or explain logically. The first one was about a 50 centimeter tall, a guesstimate, shadowy, dark bipedal figure running at a high speed away from me, which I only saw in the corner of my eye. I didn't pay much attention to it. 300 meters further, I saw what at first appeared to be a human in dark clothes walking around 20 or 30 meters in front of me. But when I took a better look, it seemed like it was just legs up to around knee height. After I realized what I had seen, and just couldn't make any logical conclusion of it, it turned to the left and walked through a tree line, after which it seemed to have switched to 4 legs and disappeared by the time I walked where it had been standing previously. What's even weirder is the fact that there's nowhere to hide in that area, and I had clear vision of where it should have gone. It even checked where it went into the tree line. It vanished. At this point, I felt eerie and creeped out, as there usually are not really many people walking around. But it happens. Though they're always sort of fully visible and they never disappear. The third time was almost at my house door, where I had heard rustling and movement in the bushes, where cats usually hide, but they don't usually make such loud noises. The thing that I saw disappears into the tree line, somewhat resembling a Fresno nightcrawler, but it had human legs and it was dark black and shadowy. This was the Copenhagen metropolitan area, if it helps anyhow. Late night TV watcher. Years ago, I lived in a cute little spot in a benign, safe neighborhood. The spot was recently built, maybe 1 or 2 years old, and I was thrilled to sign the lease in the area. My residence was basically the size of a studio, but with a walled-off bedroom. All the neighbors were great and everything was excellent, but from the day I moved in, I was not at ease. I've always been solitary and I lived and stayed and camped in some of the more questionable places, so I couldn't put my finger on why a trendy, well-built new residence would give me a feeling of dread and discomfort. I would sit on my couch and feel constantly watched. If I took a nap, I would wake extremely anxious. I started sleeping with the lights on for no other reason than the pitch black just kind of felt weird. I started spending more and more time at my partner's place, so these feelings of unease I just chalked up to not wanting to be alone or being busy and looking forward to plans. Cut to a few months into my lease. The feelings of unease are daily, and I'm waking up consistently in the middle of the night with unprovoked anxiety. One night in particular will always stand out to me. I had a small TV in my bedroom I would occasionally watch movies or shows on. 2 or 3 in the morning. Sounds cheesy, but I promise that was the time that my TV was on. I groped around the remote, assuming that my cat had walked over it. I turned the TV off and closed my eyes. Seconds later, the TV clicked back on. Instinctually, I stayed still, not wanting to believe that it turned back on. I found the remote on a nightstand, and again clicked it off. This time pulling the batteries out, thinking that the power button was sticky. In defiance, the TV turned back within 30 seconds, but this time the screen was entirely white, unlike the standard Roku homepage. I popped up, said to the air something along the lines of, "Absolutely not," or maybe "knock it off," and I unplugged the TV. I never experimented, with the TV, and I'm thankfully in the next month I'm moving into a different residence. I even got rid of the TV, assuming that at best it had an electrical failure, and at worst it was some sort of unintentional portal. It's been 12 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. When I was 19, my uncle asked me to stay with him for the summer. He had just bought a home in rural Pennsylvania, farmland out in Amish country. The home and property were pretty run down, so he was paying me to stay with him for the summer and working on fixing things up. It was a large old home and had 2 staircases. One small one in the back part of the house that led directly into his bedroom, and then the main staircase by the front door that led to the other bedrooms. Being a teenager, I used to stay up downstairs watching TV after he had gone to bed. After a few weeks, I started to get a weird feeling being alone at night. I would just start to feel like there was someone else downstairs. Sometimes I would think I had heard someone whispering. I would get slightly paranoid and find myself glancing in the direction of the adjacent room. And it had nothing but just a couple of chairs in it. I chalked it up to the fact that maybe it was just an unfamiliar house, and it gets incredibly dark out there in the middle of nowhere. As time went on, my uncomfortable and scared feelings started escalating. It's hard to explain, but I had that uncanny feeling of being watched when I was alone at night. There were times when I would get up and go to the other rooms downstairs and turn on the lights just to look and make myself feel better. I eventually just stopped staying up downstairs and would just go up to my room and read. Not long after, the sense of someone else being present began following me into my room, which hadn't been the case before. It was like one moment everything was normal and I was happily reading or lying in bed, and then I would get this weighty feeling of something entering the room and watching me. I just tried to ignore it, and I'd eventually fall asleep. Things continued to escalate. The presence started following me into my room virtually every night. I would immediately notice because there would be that weighty change in the feeling of the room, and the temperature also seemed to get colder. I would lie in bed at night and hear whispering or breathing in the room, and I started sleeping with the lights on. This next part is the point in the story that the title of my post is alluding to. One night I was lying on my bed with the lights on, reading. I was pretty tired from work that we did that day, and I was falling asleep earlier than usual. Everything was normal in the room at this point, and I felt relieved because I just wanted to get a good night's sleep. I set my book down and drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, I started to be awakened by a strange sound. Lying there with my eyes closed, I could hear something that sounded like rubbing. It wasn't loud, but just this constant, faint rubbing sound coming from nearby. I regained consciousness enough to think, "What's that?" And when I came to, I was opening my eyes, and I looked down toward my chest. I had been sleeping on my back, and I found my left arm extended straight up into the air, reaching toward the ceiling. The rubbing sound was my own fingers. They were being played with. My fingers were being bent and manipulated, and the sound was the skin of my fingers rubbing against each other. Directly above my hand was what I can only describe as a black mist or fog, maybe 2.5 or 3 feet wide. Having just woken up, what was happening didn't really immediately register. I lay there staring at my hand and the mist for a few seconds, confused. I think this was compounded by the fact that I couldn't feel my hand, so it almost seemed like it wasn't even happening to me. Then, like a bolt of lightning, a jolt of pure terror shot through my entire body. I had never felt terror before. I had been afraid in my life, but I didn't know what terror was until this moment. I think horror movies actually do a pretty good job of recreating how it feels, with the disorienting camera angles and music, like the famous score from Psycho. I yanked my arm back and sprang back like a cornered animal sitting up at the head of the bed, my back and arms pinned up against the wall as I stared at this mist. It just slowly faded away and then it was gone. That's my experience. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I replayed it over and over in my head. Did that actually happen? Was I dreaming? I must have been dreaming, but I'm sitting here awake. The sheets kicked off my bed from when I sprang back. It happened so clearly. No, it was real. This really happened, but what could have it been? It couldn't have. I decided to tell my uncle the next day. I had mentioned previously that I got creeped out hanging out downstairs alone, but that was the extent that he knew up until this point. He actually believed me, or pretended to, and said that he got weird feelings in the house at times as well. He told me that the previous owner had been an elderly man that passed away. At this point, I only had a couple more weeks left at his place before I needed to head home and get ready for the next year at college. I tried to stick it out, but after 2 entirely sleepless nights, I told him I was heading back home early and left. He ended up moving for work a couple years later. And I didn't visit him once at that house for a family Thanksgiving, but I didn't even sleep there. I know this is an incredibly long post, and if you made it this far, thank you. People who have had experiences or have knowledge on the topic, do you have any thoughts? I've never had any paranormal experiences before this, and didn't really think about ghosts or whether they were real or not. I certainly never thought that they'd be able to physically interact with me. And as you can probably guess, I'm a firm believer now, but haven't had any other experiences, and I hope not to.